Lena Parker sat on her worn-out couch, a half-empty glass of wine resting on the coffee table in front of her. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of the television screen, but her focus wasn't on the flickering images. Instead, her eyes were locked on the dating app open on her phone. The endless parade of profiles seemed like an insurmountable wall. Each swipe felt more and more like a fruitless attempt to regain something she'd lost: hope. She had tried this before, too many times to count, and it had never ended well. Conversations that started with potential always fizzled out, and dates that seemed promising quickly turned into awkward silences and forced goodbyes. The cycle had drained her, leaving her with nothing but a sense of dread whenever she opened the app. Yet here she was again, fingers hovering over the screen. Lena hesitated before swiping right on a profile. His name was Thomas. His picture showed a charming smile, the kind that could light up a room. He wasn't particularly striking, but there was something disarming about his gaze. She studied his bio, a mix of casual, thoughtful, and respectful. His opening message was different from the typical, "Hey," or "What's up?" It was a genuine inquiry into her interests, something about her love for hiking and her work in digital marketing. For a moment, Lena felt a flicker of curiosity, followed by a familiar pang of hesitation. Was she really doing this again? A tiny voice inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, he could be different. She let out a deep sigh, frustrated with herself for even considering it. Still, her finger moved to swipe right, the decision made more out of exhaustion than hope. She was tired of feeling cynical. Maybe it wouldn't hurt to give it one last shot. It didn't take long before a message from Thomas popped up on her screen. The words were polite, even warm. He thanked her for matching and asked if she'd ever been on a hike in the local mountains. Lena smiled, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she typed her response. She kept it light, mentioning a recent hike she'd taken but emphasizing how she preferred shorter, more leisurely walks. The conversation picked up quickly, with Thomas asking more personal questions, nothing too intrusive, just little details about her life. She found herself answering without hesitation, sharing tidbits about her favorite books and the challenges of her job. She could almost hear his voice in her mind, friendly and relaxed, as if they'd known each other for years. By the time the conversation had stretched well into the night, Lena noticed that Thomas had begun remembering little things she'd said earlier in their exchange. He mentioned that she'd mentioned her dog in passing, and asked how he was doing. It was a small thing, but it made Lena feel heard. He wasn't just checking off a list of standard questions, he was paying attention. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt a spark of excitement. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Thomas. Just wanted to check in. Hope your night's going well. I really enjoy our chats. Lena's heart gave a little skip, and she quickly typed back, feeling a sense of warmth spread through her chest. As the hours passed, her mind began to relax. For once, she wasn't second-guessing every word. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad after all. Over the next few days, Thomas's messages became more frequent. At first, Lena found it flattering. He would text her first thing in the morning, asking how she slept or if she'd had a busy day ahead. By mid-afternoon, there would be another message. And then one more in the evening, asking what she was up to. It was constant. Lena began to feel an unfamiliar sense of pressure, like she had to respond quickly, always be available. At first, she tried to brush it off. He was just excited, she told herself. He was interested. But the frequency of his messages began to weigh on her. There were moments when she felt suffocated by the constant stream of texts. She had things to do, work, errands, time to herself, but Thomas's messages kept popping up. She could feel her stomach tighten every time her phone buzzed. She was starting to pull back, replying with short answers and trying to keep the conversation light. But Thomas didn't seem to notice. If anything, his messages only grew more frequent. He started sending her personal details about his life, stories about his childhood, how he was still close with his sister, and how he'd been looking for someone to share his love of hiking with. It felt a little too soon, a little too much. Lena couldn't put her finger on what bothered her. After all, they'd only been talking for a few days. But something felt off, a creeping sensation that she couldn't ignore. She'd seen this kind of behavior before. Too eager. Too much, too soon. But she didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just overthinking it. Maybe this was what relationships were like now. It was normal, right? After days of back and forth texts, Lena finally agreed to meet Thomas in person. She spent an hour getting ready, scrutinizing her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She questioned every little detail. Was she dressed too casually? Was her makeup too much? It felt like the stakes were high, even though they really weren't. She couldn't quite shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that she was walking into something she couldn't predict. But what was she supposed to do? She had agreed to the date. It was already set. Lena stood in front of her closet, holding a dress up to her body, trying to gauge if it would work. It was simple, but it made her feel confident. She sighed and slipped it on, trying not to think about the nagging doubts in her mind. She grabbed her keys and left, her heart pounding in her chest. The restaurant was a small, quiet spot in the city. Lena had been here a few times before, but tonight it felt different. She could feel her nerves getting the best of her as she walked in, scanning the room for Thomas. When she spotted him, her breath caught. He was standing near the entrance, looking just like his photos, charming, with that same disarming smile. He waved when he saw her, and his smile widened. "Hey, Lena," he said, his voice warm and inviting. "You look amazing." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She smiled back, trying to keep things casual. They shook hands before sitting down at a table near the window, where the soft glow of the streetlights cast a gentle light on their faces. The conversation flowed effortlessly, just like it had over text. They laughed at little jokes, shared stories, and found common ground in their mutual interests. The atmosphere was light, the food was delicious, and for the first time in a long while, Lena allowed herself to relax. She found herself enjoying his company, more than she thought she would. But as the night wore on, she noticed something that set her on edge. Every now and then, Thomas would glance at his phone, and his expression would change ever so slightly. His eyes would narrow for a second, and he'd tap the screen before sliding it back into his pocket. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Was he distracted? Or was she just imagining things? Over the next few weeks, their relationship continued to grow. Lena felt herself growing more comfortable with Thomas, enjoying their time together, museum visits, park strolls, dinners at various restaurants. But with each passing date, she noticed more signs of his increasing need for control. He began texting her more frequently between their meetings, sometimes every hour, always asking what she was doing, who she was with. At first, she thought it was just a sign of affection, but the intensity started to cross a line. She would be at work, trying to focus, and her phone would buzz, only to reveal yet another text from Thomas. He would ask if she was free for dinner that night, even though they had just seen each other 2 days ago. His persistence wore on her, and while she tried to explain that she needed space, he seemed unable, or unwilling, to understand. Lena found herself becoming more withdrawn, her responses growing shorter, her answers more nonchalant. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, but she also didn't want to be smothered. She wanted to take things slow, but Thomas seemed to be in a hurry. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. One evening, as they sat down for dinner at a new Italian restaurant, Lena noticed something shift. Thomas was no longer fully present. His eyes kept darting to his phone, his fingers tapping restlessly against the table. He seemed irritated, impatient even, his usual charm nowhere to be found. Lena asked him about his day, but his responses were flat and distracted, barely more than one-word answers. She tried to keep the conversation going, but it felt like pulling teeth. It wasn't just the phone, there was something else. A distance in his demeanor. Lena couldn't pinpoint it, but the unease in her gut grew. As Thomas shifted in his chair, Lena saw something blinking from the corner of her eye. At first, she thought it was a reflection from the candle on the table, but then she saw it again, a faint red light, barely visible, peeking from the inside of his jacket near his shoulder. Her heart skipped. Was it a camera? Lena didn't say anything, but her mind raced. She tried to focus on the conversation, to act normal, but her eyes kept drifting to the red blinking light. Every time Thomas shifted, the light flickered again, and Lena's suspicion grew. What was he hiding? Her stomach churned with the realization that the man across from her might not be who he appeared to be. As the night wore on, Lena's mind spun with possibilities. Could it really be a hidden camera? Why would Thomas have won? Her thoughts collided, trying to piece together the evidence, the constant texting, the possessiveness, and now this strange device. Everything clicked into place in a way that made her feel sick. But what could she do? She had to be sure before making any accusations. She needed to find out what was really going on. Unable to keep her thoughts to herself any longer, Lena leaned in slightly and asked casually, "What's that red light on your jacket? Is it a malfunctioning button or something?" Thomas froze, his eyes narrowing. He immediately tried to brush it off. "Oh, it's nothing. Just an old gadget, probably malfunctioning." His laugh was forced, but Lena wasn't buying it. She pressed further, her voice steady but assertive. "What kind of gadget?" He shifted in his seat, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his jacket. The smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. Thomas quickly changed the subject, suggesting that they'd just enjoy the night. His nervous laugh barely masked the tension in his voice. He quickly stood up to excuse himself, but Lena saw it. His hands were shaking as he reached for his jacket again. Lena sat back in her seat, watching him. He was hiding something, and she was going to find out what. As Thomas returned to the table, Lena's mind was made up. This wasn't normal. He wasn't normal. She'd had enough of the lies and games. The trust she had tried to build felt like it had cracked, leaving only the faint red light of truth. As she quickly finished her meal, Lena's resolve hardened. She was leaving tonight. This date would be her last with Thomas. Lena's heart thudded in her chest as she stood up, the scrape of her chair against the floor sounding like a distant, dissonant note in the otherwise calm restaurant. Her fingers gripped the edges of her purse, knuckles white from the force. There was no time to think, only to move. She didn't look back. Her mind was racing, calculating, analyzing every step, as if somehow the moment she allowed herself to stop would be the moment she became trapped. She wasn't sure if the shaking of her hand was from the adrenaline or the sheer panic rising in her chest, but her legs were already carrying her toward the door. Her heart was in her throat. Every instinct screamed at her to flee. Get out. Now. There was no telling what Thomas was capable of, but she had seen enough to know she couldn't afford to stay. Her fingers reached for the door, but her eyes briefly scanned the room, hoping to find an exit strategy that didn't involve drawing attention. The last thing she needed was the entire restaurant turning their heads toward her as she bolted out. But none of that mattered now. There was only the door. Only the way out. She could feel Thomas's presence behind her, but she dared not look back. Her fingers had almost brushed the door handle when she heard the unmistakable sound of chair legs scraping against the floor. Lena's breath hitched in her throat. She turned just in time to see Thomas standing, his calm, collected facade faltering as he quickly crossed the room, blocking her path. "Lena, wait," he said, his voice smooth, but there was something almost too insistent about it. His hand reached out, brushing lightly against her arm as he tried to guide her back. "Please, sit down. It's not what you think." Lena recoiled, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. The touch was gentle at first, but the edge in his voice was unmistakable. There was something behind that smile now, something that twisted her stomach into knots. "I'm not doing this," Lena said, her voice shaky but firm. She felt an unspoken pressure coming from him, his presence too close, too overwhelming. "I'm leaving, Thomas." His hand hovered, almost as if he was waiting for her to reconsider. "You don't need to." He paused, his smile faltering, his brow furrowing ever so slightly. "Come on, sit down. We can talk about this." Lena shook her head, her pulse pounding as she stared at him, calculating every move. His attempt at calmness wasn't working. Her feet were already taking her back toward the door, but her stomach churned. There was something far more dangerous lurking behind Thomas's pleas. He wasn't just trying to change her mind, he was trying to control her. "No, Thomas. I'm leaving," Lena repeated, her voice unwavering now, tinged with authority. She pulled her arm back sharply, feeling a jolt of power at the action. She wasn't some passive victim anymore. Something in her had snapped. She wasn't going to let him have the power. Thomas's face twitched. His eyes darkened for a moment before he straightened, wiping that forced smile from his face. The shift was subtle, but Lena saw it clearly. He had stopped pretending. "You don't understand, Lena," he said slowly, the words measured. He took a step closer to her, his body language now more rigid. "I'm just trying to protect you." The words caught Lena off guard. Protect? She felt her stomach twist with a fresh wave of disgust. "I don't need your protection," Lena snapped, her voice more forceful now. "You've crossed a line." She could see it in his eyes now. That was it. The charade was over. Thomas wasn't just some well-meaning, overeager man. He was someone far darker. She could feel it in the way he stood now, every muscle tense, like a predator preparing to strike. Her suspicions were no longer just gut feelings. They were confirmed. The realization made her spine stiffen, her mind sharper. She could see the way his jaw clenched, how his posture changed, but it wasn't enough to stop her. She had to get out of there, before he made his next move. The air in the restaurant seemed to freeze as Thomas's demeanor shifted once again. The mask of civility fell completely. His eyes, once charming, now held a hard, almost threatening edge. His lips curled into a tight line as he took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "You don't understand, Lena. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," he growled. Lena could feel her body tense, the hairs on her arms standing up in alarm. His words sent a chill down her spine. She took another step back, and Thomas mirrored her, moving closer with surprising speed, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm trying to protect you," he repeated, but this time, there was no softness in his tone. It was laced with something far more sinister. "You don't know what's out there. What I'm doing is for your own good." Her breath quickened, her pulse racing, her body caught between the fight-or-flight instinct. Everything in her screamed that she needed to leave, now. She couldn't let him corner her, not physically, not emotionally. Lena's legs were shaky, but the rush of adrenaline coursing through her veins gave her the strength to push forward. She didn't need to think anymore. The decision had been made. She had to get out. Without a second thought, she shoved past Thomas, her body trembling with the force of her actions. Her heart thudded so loudly in her ears, it felt as though the entire world had been drowned out. She didn't care how it looked. She didn't care if she made a scene. She just had to get away. As she sprinted toward the door, her purse tightly clutched in her hand, her mind focused only on one thing: escape. She didn't hear Thomas's footsteps at first, didn't realize he was coming after her until it was too late. Just as she reached the door, Lena's ears caught a faint voice behind her. It was low, urgent, a voice she immediately recognized as Thomas's. "The new target is scheduled," Thomas's voice carried toward her. "It's all going according to plan, don't worry." Lena froze, her fingers still on the handle. Her stomach lurched violently, her pulse pounding in her ears as the words hit her like a sledgehammer. Target. The word echoed in her mind, sending shivers down her spine. Thomas wasn't just after her. He had been doing this to other women. She wasn't the first. Her body stiffened with the revelation. She couldn't move. He was a predator, and she was just one of his victims. Her breath came in shallow gasps as her thoughts spun wildly. Thomas was part of something bigger. A network. Her legs felt weak, like they would give out beneath her. How many others had he done this to? How deep did this go? The panic was almost overwhelming, but Lena's resolve sharpened. She couldn't just run. She had to stop him. She had to stop this before it continued. But her legs felt like they were made of lead, and her mind raced, desperately trying to figure out what to do. She could hear Thomas's voice in the background, still talking on the phone, but she knew she couldn't afford to stay hidden forever. She had to act. She had to get proof. Lena's fingers grasped the door handle once more, but before she could turn it, Thomas was there, faster than she anticipated, stepping into her path with surprising speed. His grip on her arm was tight, unforgiving, and Lena gasped, the sudden force of his touch making her stomach lurch. "You're not going anywhere, Lena," he growled, his voice low and filled with a fury that made her blood run cold. Lena yelped, her heart pounding as he yanked her back, dragging her away from the door. Panic surged through her body, every fiber of her being screaming for her to escape. She struggled, her legs kicking, her arms flailing, but his hold was ironclad. She wasn't just dealing with a manipulative liar anymore. This was someone who wanted to control her, physically and mentally. The terror that surged through her veins was real. It was happening. In the chaos of the struggle, Lena's hand found its way to Thomas's jacket pocket, and in a flash of instinct, she grabbed his phone. She didn't hesitate. She ripped it from his grasp, ignoring the sharp pain in her fingers as she yanked it free. For just a split second, she broke free, her chest heaving with panic as Thomas cursed in frustration behind her. He was too slow. Lena was already darting toward the door. Her legs carried her faster than she thought possible. She didn't look back. Her breath came in ragged gasps, the fear propelling her forward as the sound of Thomas's furious footsteps echoed behind her. She turned the corner, her mind focused on nothing but the escape. The alley was dark, narrow, and cold, but it was a haven. She slowed her pace, her body trembling from the adrenaline, trying to steady herself. Her hands were clammy, but she still gripped Thomas's phone tightly. Lena's hands shook as she pulled the phone from her purse, slipping behind a dumpster. She quickly unlocked the device, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the apps with lightning speed. She found the folder labeled Videos. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she opened it. Each clip that appeared on the screen made her stomach churn. Lena's mind reeled as she clicked on one of the videos. It was a woman she recognized from a previous date. A woman who was now a victim of Thomas's manipulative scheme. Lena's hands trembled as the truth settled over her like a suffocating weight. She wasn't the only one. There were others. Many others. She had to stop this. She had to get this evidence to the police. Before Thomas came after her. Lena crouched behind the dumpster, her body trembling with cold and fear. The harsh, metallic scent of the alley filled her senses as she leaned against the brick wall, trying to steady her breathing. Her fingers were numb as she fumbled with her phone, struggling to type through the panic that bubbled up inside her. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Her hands were shaking too violently, but she forced herself to focus. She quickly typed out the message to Rachel, her closest friend. "Thomas is dangerous. He's been recording me and other women. I have proof." Her heart pounded as she hit send, and then, in a moment of pure desperation, she added, "Please, Rachel, I need you." Lena's eyes remained glued to the phone, willing it to ring, willing it to give her some sense of reassurance. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, the message remained unread, a silent weight pressing down on her chest. The screen glared back at her, cold and unyielding, as her mind raced through every possible outcome. Rachel would see it soon, right? She had to. The message stayed unread, and the fear swelled in her chest, twisting and knotting her stomach. She pressed her fingers tighter against the phone, her breath shallow. This wasn't enough. What if Rachel didn't respond? What if no one could help her in time? The world felt like it was narrowing down around her, the cold air and the dark alley offering no comfort, no escape. Lena jumped at the sound of her phone vibrating again. Her eyes darted to the screen, and for a split second, she felt a flicker of relief when she saw Rachel's name. But as she opened the message, her heart sank. It wasn't Rachel. It was Thomas. "If you tell anyone, I will make sure your life is ruined. You have no idea what you're dealing with." His words flashed across the screen, and Lena's pulse skipped. She could feel the blood drain from her face as she read and reread the text, her hands trembling more than before. The message was a warning, a threat, plain and simple. And Lena knew, with a sickening certainty, that Thomas was no longer just a man she was trying to escape. He was a man who controlled her every move, who had eyes on her at all times. He knew she was trying to break free, and he was warning her that he wouldn't let her. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to push away the wave of fear threatening to overwhelm her. The walls were closing in. Thomas was playing a game she hadn't understood fully, and now, with his message, she realized just how deep he had buried his claws into her life. Her options had narrowed drastically, and the urgency of the situation hit her harder than ever. There was no more room for hesitation. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she reread the text. Her thoughts spiraled, panic rising in her chest. She pressed the phone against her chest as if to make the reality of it all go away, but it didn't. The harsh truth was too heavy, too suffocating. The walls were closing in faster than she could react. She had the proof. She had the video. But the more she thought about it, the less certain she was that it would matter. If Thomas was tracking her every move, if he was watching and controlling everything she did, would the evidence even be enough? What good was a phone full of videos if he already knew where she was, what she was doing, who she was talking to? Her head was spinning with calculations. She could run. She could hide. But how long before Thomas found her again? How long before his associates tracked her down and cornered her once more? She had no idea, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stop now. There was no turning back. She had to keep going. Her fingers, still shaking, slid across the screen of her phone as she searched through her contacts. Her eyes scanned the names until she found the one she was looking for, Detective Miles Harris. A man who had helped her before, years ago, with a situation that, in hindsight, seemed almost trivial compared to what she was facing now. But he was trustworthy. He was someone who could help. Lena quickly typed out a message, her fingers moving faster than her racing thoughts. "I have evidence of a crime. It involves Thomas and multiple women. Please, I need your help." For a moment, she hesitated, her thumb hovering over the send button. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Would he believe her? Would he help? The fear of rejection, the fear of being too late, settled in her stomach like a stone. But she couldn't sit here, hiding in the alley, hoping for an answer that might never come. She needed to act. She hit send. Her fingers gripped the phone tightly as she waited. The seconds stretched out. A few moments later, a reply came through. It was quick, terse, but it gave Lena something to hold on to. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Be careful. Don't trust anyone. Lena exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. A flicker of hope, small but undeniable, ignited inside her. Miles Harris, a detective who had helped her before, was on his way. She wasn't alone in this anymore. Her fear didn't dissipate entirely, but it was tempered with the knowledge that she had someone else, someone capable, on her side. Lena pocketed the phone and stood up, gathering herself. The dark alleyway was quiet, too quiet. She glanced around, still feeling the weight of every step, the eyes that might be watching her. Her heart thudded heavily in her chest as she started walking toward the park, where Harris had told her to meet him. It wasn't far. She didn't have much time. As she walked, she tried to prepare herself for the meeting. What would she say? What if he didn't believe her? What if Thomas had already sent people after her? Her mind churned with possibilities, but there was nothing she could do about them now. She had to see this through. The streetlights flickered above her, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The night was cool, but Lena could feel the heat rising from her skin, a mix of fear and determination. She kept walking, her steps purposeful, though her mind raced with everything she couldn't control. As Lena neared the park's entrance, something felt wrong. The hair on the back of her neck stood up, and she slowed her pace, scanning the area. Shadows clung to the trees, and the park was eerily quiet. Too quiet. Then, from behind a tree, a figure emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, and ominous. His eyes locked onto hers, and he stepped forward, blocking her path. "Give me the phone," he growled, his voice low and threatening. Lena froze for a split second, her breath catching. This was one of Thomas's associates. She could tell by the look in his eyes, the same predatory gleam she had seen in Thomas's eyes. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to take the phone. To take her. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She didn't have time for this. "Stay away from me," she shouted, her voice laced with fear, but also defiance. She wasn't going to give him what he wanted. She couldn't. The man didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing for her, and Lena stumbled back, her feet slipping on the rough gravel path. Lena's knees scraped the ground as she fell, but she didn't waste time. She pushed herself back up, clutching the phone to her chest like it was a lifeline. The man reached for her, his hand closing around her wrist. She yanked her arm free, but he was too strong. He tried again, but Lena twisted out of his grip, feeling the sharp sting of his punch to her ribs. She gasped in pain, but she didn't stop. The phone stayed in her hand. She had to keep it. With a burst of adrenaline, Lena pushed the man away with all the strength she could muster. He stumbled back, giving her the moment she needed to turn and run. Her legs burned as she sprinted toward the park exit, her body shaking with the exertion. She didn't dare look back. The sound of the man's angry shouts echoed in her ears, but she pushed on, her lungs screaming for air, her heart thundering in her chest. Lena ducked into a nearby alley, gasping for breath. She felt her legs wobble beneath her, the tension finally catching up to her. She pulled the phone from her purse, her hands still trembling. It was her only link to everything, her only hope of proving what Thomas had done. As she scrolled through the phone, panic washed over her once again. She found something she hadn't expected. An app. A tracker. It was there, running in the background, tracking her every move. Lena's stomach dropped. Thomas had been following her the whole time. Her fingers moved in a blur, trying to disable the app, to break free from his control. But deep down, she knew this was only temporary. She couldn't stop him forever. As she walked down the darkened street, fear gnawed at her every step. She knew Thomas was out there, somewhere, watching. The dread settled heavily in her chest, each step taking her closer to the confrontation she had feared from the beginning. Lena's phone vibrated again, and she stopped in her tracks, dread creeping up her spine. The message from Thomas was waiting. She opened it, her heart sinking as she read it. "You think you can run? I'm already one step ahead." She turned around slowly, her breath catching in her throat. She was surrounded. There was no escape. Lena's breath came in ragged bursts, her lungs burning as she forced her legs to carry her through the dense woods. Branches whipped at her face, but she couldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. Every step was a battle against exhaustion, the sound of heavy footsteps trailing her, growing louder. She was close to the edge of the woods, but it seemed like the trees would never end. Her heart hammered in her chest, her vision blurring from fear and fatigue. But just as the clearing appeared ahead, two figures emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. Her pulse skipped. The men were tall, their silhouettes cutting through the dimming light, their postures taut with intent. Lena instinctively took a step back, her hand reaching for any kind of weapon, any object she could use. Her eyes darted around, but it was too late. The man on the right lunged forward, grabbing her arms and pinning her to the nearest tree. She screamed, kicking and biting, but his grip was iron. Her body strained against his hold, but it was futile. The other man, his face cold and unfeeling, pulled out his phone and sent a message with quick, practiced motions. A chill swept through Lena's body as she realized it was happening. She had been caught. Everything she had done, every attempt to escape, had been for nothing. Her stomach twisted as she realized the depth of the danger. She was at the mercy of Thomas's network now, and all her efforts seemed to vanish like a dream unraveling. The van was cold and cramped, its interior smelling of dust and stale air. Lena's wrists were bound tightly with thick rope, the fibers digging into her skin with every slight movement. The two men sat across from her, their eyes fixed on her with cold, calculating indifference. She could feel their eyes on her, like predators sizing up their prey. The air between them was thick with menace. One of the men sneered at her, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "You'll regret this, Lena. You think you've got him, but Thomas always gets what he wants. Always." His voice was dripping with venom, and it made Lena's skin crawl. Her heart pounded as she strained against the ropes, testing them, looking for an escape. But the reality was sinking in. There was no escape, not yet. They would take her back to Thomas, or worse, keep her hidden while they worked out what to do with her. They had the leverage. She had the proof, but what good was it when she was shackled by fear and bound by rope? She couldn't let them get away with it. But how? Her mind raced with possibilities, all of them leading to one bitter realization: she had nothing left to hold on to. The weight of her fear began to crush her resolve, and she wanted nothing more than to collapse into the corner and shut everything out. But she couldn't. Not yet. As the van rumbled down a bumpy road, Lena's thoughts swirled in chaos. She was weak, exhausted, and losing time. Every second in this van brought her closer to Thomas, closer to being silenced forever. Her eyes scanned the floor, the dim light inside casting faint shadows. Then, something caught her eye, an object near her feet. A piece of broken glass. Her heart skipped. It wasn't much, but it was something. With trembling hands, she shifted slightly, trying to stay unnoticed. She needed the shard. Slowly, she edged her foot closer to the glass, her movements calculated, careful. The two men were still watching her, but their focus had wavered just enough. They were busy talking among themselves, oblivious to her efforts. When one of them leaned in to threaten her again, Lena saw her opportunity. She lunged forward, grabbing the sharp shard with a quick, decisive movement. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough. With every ounce of strength she could muster, Lena thrust the glass shard into the man's leg, a swift, brutal stab. He cried out in pain, his grip faltering as he yanked his leg back. The other man shouted in surprise, his eyes wide as he moved to restrain her, but Lena was already moving. Her body reacted on instinct, adrenaline flooding her system. For a split second, the ropes loosened, and she broke free. Her heart thundered in her chest as she scrambled to her feet, the van lurching in motion. The van screeched to a halt, and Lena saw her chance. Her breath came in short gasps as she slammed her shoulder into the door. It burst open with a loud crash, and Lena tumbled out onto the rough, dirt road. Her feet hit the ground with a hard thud, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The men shouted behind her, but their voices were drowned out by the pounding of her own heart. Her legs burned, her breath was ragged, but she ran, faster than she ever thought possible. The darkness of the night enveloped her as she pushed herself forward, her mind focused solely on one thing: escape. She heard their footsteps behind her, the chase already on, but she pushed harder. Every breath felt like fire in her lungs, but she ignored it. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Hours later, battered and bruised, Lena stumbled across an isolated cabin deep in the woods. She approached cautiously, every nerve on edge. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pushed open the door, stepping inside. The air was still, heavy with the scent of old wood and dust. And then she saw him. Thomas was standing there, his back to her. He turned slowly as the door creaked, his cold, venomous gaze locking with hers. His smile was absent, replaced by an expression that was as chilling as it was smug. "You think you can escape me, Lena?" Thomas's voice was low, the words wrapped in a snake-like hiss. He took a step toward her, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Lena stood tall, despite the bruises, despite the exhaustion. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her any longer. She reached into her pocket and pulled out his phone, holding it up for him to see. Her hands were trembling, but her resolve was strong. "I already have, Thomas," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. Thomas's eyes widened for a brief moment, then narrowed with fury as Lena tapped the screen of his phone, bringing up the videos. The images flashed before them, footage of Thomas manipulating and recording the women he had trapped, his control evident in each frame. The evidence was undeniable, and as each clip played, Thomas's face contorted with rage. "You thought you were untouchable, didn't you?" Lena's voice was steady, her anger simmering beneath the surface. "But now, everyone will know the truth." Thomas stepped forward, his fists clenched in fury. But Lena was ready. She raised his phone, her thumb hovering over the screen. "It's over, Thomas. You're done." Just as Thomas lunged toward her, the sound of sirens echoed from outside, growing louder with each passing second. The door burst open, and police officers flooded into the cabin, guns drawn. Thomas froze, his eyes widening with shock as they surrounded him. "It's over," one of the officers said, their voice firm. They moved quickly, securing Thomas's hands behind his back, taking him to the floor with swift efficiency. The other officers moved to apprehend his associates, who had been lurking in the back. Lena stood back, watching, her breath still shallow, as the criminals she had fought so hard to escape were finally taken into custody. The relief that washed over her was overwhelming. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of peace. As the police processed Thomas and his associates, Lena sat with Detective Harris. She handed over Thomas's phone, providing all the evidence she had gathered. She explained what had happened, recounting how Thomas had manipulated and blackmailed women he had targeted. Harris thanked her for her bravery, his voice steady and appreciative. "You've done more than most could ever do," he said. "We'll take it from here." Later, as the authorities took Thomas and his associates away, Lena stood by the window of the cabin, watching the police vehicles fade into the distance. Her mind swelled with everything she had just lived through, the toll it had taken on her. She had fought, she had struggled, but she had survived. Just as she breathed a sigh of relief, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Hesitating for a moment, Lena pulled it out, her heart racing again. The message was from an anonymous number. She opened it quickly. "The game has only just begun." Attached was a final video, but Thomas was still in prison. Lena's stomach dropped. She wasn't done.